Bitter Heart by Mary Griggs. The bitter heart eats its owner, an Etropian proverb. In this reading, there'll be three primary characters: Julian, the main protagonist, Mikhail, her bodyguard, and Philip, the captain of the smugglers. From Chapter 1. The corridors of the spaceport were a seething mass of people. With the planet less than 50 cycles from invasion, everyone was trying to escape. Julian and her entourage were heading for the section of the spaceport that held one of two remaining luxury liners. As the youngest daughter of the system's ruling family, she had a secure berth on a ship that would not leave orbit without her. Her stomach churned with the knowledge that her privileged status was affording her an opportunity few others had. The fact that her parents and two older siblings were staying on the planet did nothing but add to the acid in her gut. The only real hope for the planet was for someone to make an appeal before the Universal Trade Conclave to condemn the Bobway invasion and demand they relinquish control of ground they had already seized. This plan rested entirely on her politically unsavvy shoulders. She glanced at the four members of the Royal Security Force who were assigned to escort her. They probably had forgotten more about diplomacy than she ever knew. Suddenly, Julian felt a stabbing pain in her abdomen and abruptly stopped. It caused a cascade reaction as the rest of her retinue stumbled to a halt around her. "Sorry," she said absently as she pulled back her hood. The commander of her bodyguards, Mikhail, stepped forward and pivoted to put his back to the wall so he could see both her and the crowd. He growled, "We don't have time for this." "There's something wrong here," Julian replied as she extended her hand toward the solid-seeming metallic surface. Her hand went right through the wall, and she stepped inside a disused vendor alcove that had been disguised by the camouflaging. It was completely filled with a mass of boxes, equipment, and four startled off-worlders. For a moment, they stood in a frozen tableau, staring at Julian as she stared back at them. Wide-eyed, Julian gazed around the small space and smiled at the thought of all these people hiding in practically plain sight. The smile left her face as someone moaned from the floor. She looked down and saw an older man lying on a pallet. His eyes were closed, and deep lines of pain were etched on his face. She pulled off her gloves and walked over to him. "Hold it right there." A young man with the skin and hair the color of late-season honey stepped between her and the wounded man. "What do you think you're—" His voice trailed off as two of Julian's retainers joined them in the space. At the sight of the three people around her charge, her guards drew their weapons. Shrugging off her cape, Julian knelt beside the injured man, laid a hand on his forehead, and centered her awareness. After a brief moment, she closed her eyes and reached blindly towards his hands, which were clenched tight against his belly. As she concentrated on the injury, gradually, almost imperceptibly, the tense form beneath her hands relaxed. She opened her eyes and looked down into the eyes of the now conscious and quite surprised man. "How do you feel now?" she asked. "I don't think I've ever felt better. What did you do?" He laughed and touched his belly. "Never mind, I don't think I want to know." He moved gingerly, slowly rising until he apparently realized the pain that had been incapacitating him was well and truly gone. Mikhail stepped close to her and handed her a flask filled with caramel-colored liquid. She grimaced as the pungent tincture coated her tongue. Taking the flask back and sliding it into his jacket, he whispered, "I really must insist we get to the ship." Julian patted his arm. "I have a better idea. I'm going to go with them instead." The room exploded in deafening shouting as all the foreigners and her retainers argued against the idea. Finally, the recently healed man roared, "Silence!" When they quieted down, he focused on Julian. Two questions. At her nod, he continued, "Why do you want to go with us? And why should we take you anywhere?" She laughed. "How did you get on planet and hide yourself?" The small group of foreigners exchanged glances. "You're smugglers. I stand a better chance of getting off this planet and to my destination in your ship than in anything else." She waved a hand at the half-packed containers that surrounded them. "And I'm sure you'd be happy to skip our customs inspectors. Even in this time of panic, I doubt that what you have in there can stand scrutiny. I can assure you get away cleanly." The newly recovered man stuck out his hand. "All right. I'm Captain Philip Tices, and we have a deal." Mikhail sighed and pulled out a handful of silver bars from the satchel at his waist and held them out to Philip. "This is equal to the fare we paid on the Queen. I trust it will be sufficient, as I'm trusting you with her life." He motioned for Julie and the other guards to go back towards the corridor. After you. Glancing meaningfully at his charge, he whispered, "You and I have things to talk about."